You're listening to This Week in Cardiology from theheart.org on Medscape.
Hi everyone, this is John Mandrola from theheart.org Medscape Cardiology, and this is This Week in Cardiology for December 1st, 2017. This week, I'm going to talk about screening for sudden cardiac death in athletes, exercise and peripheral artery disease, exercise and general health, supplements in health, and an unusual healthcare policy. Today, the first topic is screening for sudden cardiac death. This starts with an important paper, which is a retrospective paper, a look-back study of cardiac arrest using a thorough population-based registry of all cases of sudden events in the Ontario area, which is 6.6 million people. This study, which was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, lasted 6 years. It looked at young people between the ages of 12 and 45, and this included about 3 million people in this area. Of the 3 million, the study looked at 350,000 athletes. They had a total of about 3,800 out-of-hospital cardiac arrests among the 12 to 45-year-old persons during the study period. About 2,000 of these events occurred in a public place, and 74 events occurred during sport, 16 during competitive sports, and 58 during non-competitive sports. 10 of the 16 causes of death during competitive sports could be determined. 6 cases had either normal autopsies or normal evaluations. The overall incidence for sudden cardiac death during competitive sports was 0.76 per 100,000 athlete years. Now, the causes of events followed sort of typical patterns that have been previously described. Events that occurred in adults less than 35 years were usually due to structural or presumed electrical etiologies. Events that occurred in those over 35 years were due to ischemic heart disease. This paper found that hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy was uncommon cause of death, 12.5% of competitive athletes and 7% of non-competitive athletes. They found no ARVC or arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy related events in the competitive group. The biggest finding from this paper, from the author's perspective, is that abnormalities that could have been found on pre-participation screening was that at most 3 of the 16 competitive athletes might have had disorders detected. So overall, in this well-done study, the researchers found that sudden cardiac death during competitive sport is rare. The causes were varied, and more than 80% would not have been found on systematic screening with or without an ECG. So the main and most provocative finding is that the rarity of sudden death due to structural heart disease raises doubt over the value of pre-participation screening. In the discussion section, the authors cite a French study which is published in Circulation that found an incidence of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy of 0.85%. Well, if that incidence was applied to the 350,000 athletes in this study, they may have disqualified over 3,000 athletes. Now, if you used a more commonly quoted incidence of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy of 1 in 500, that would have meant disqualifying 700 of these athletes. Now remember, in this 6-year study, only 2 persons had sudden cardiac death due to hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy. And one of these patients or individuals had had a previous workup and was known to the docs and cleared for sport. What's more, not one of the survivors of sudden cardiac death in the competitive athletic group had a condition that would have been found on a pre-participation screening exam. For example, 2 of the abnormalities that can't be found are anomalous coronary arteries or idiopathic ventricular fibrillation. Now, this study has limits, of course, and the authors noted that, but it does cast serious doubt on the mandatory screening program. No one wants a young person to die on the field, but to screen about 150,000 people to find one potential abnormality, with the cost being disqualification of potentially hundreds or thousands of young people from sport, is simply too high a price in my mind. I think the key to preventing loss of life on the sports field comes not from screening or mandatory screening, but from better CPR education and more AEDs. Sporting activity in general surely saves lives overall. Next topic is exercise and peripheral artery disease. When something injectable called granulocyte macrophage colony stimulating factor progenitor cells beats structured exercise in anything medical, it might be time for me to reframe my entire point of view of medicine. Until that time, which is probably never, I will not be surprised the study of patients with peripheral artery disease and claudication did better with exercise than with an injectable drug or a placebo. A randomized controlled blinded study called PROPEL, presented at AHA and published in JAMA, found that these complicated-sounding progenitor cells did not improve 6-minute walk time in older patients with peripheral artery disease. This was a negative trial, and it's important because the idea behind GM-CSF cells is reasonable. This injection is supposed to work by promoting angiogenesis and improving endothelial function. But patients with peripheral artery disease who have claudication don't really care about angiogenesis and endothelial function. The outcome they are looking for is better walking ability. Now, I will continue to highlight studies that show things that make sense but don't necessarily improve outcome. It's easy to lose track of how complicated our body is. Now, the other bonus of this study is that the investigators were brave enough to compare a chemical with structured exercise. Structured exercise as a comparator for any intervention is formidable. Imagine structured exercise, for instance, against, say, statins or stents in patients with stable coronary artery disease. Third topic today is exercise and prevention of cardiovascular events. Yet another large observational study has found occupational and non-occupational physical activity was associated with significantly lower risks of major cardiovascular disease. This latest study included nearly 500,000 individuals from China. It's the standard type of observational analysis. The researchers take physical activity and they split it into quintiles, and they form a low quintile of physical activity up to the high quintiles of physical activity. And here, in this study, the hazard ratio for a cardiovascular event was 0.77, and the confidence intervals were super tight at 0.74 to 0.80, which is highly statistically significant. This study, published in JAMA Cardiology, confirms findings from another massive observational study recently published called the PURE study. And what's blatantly obvious is that the more sophisticated society gets from a tech standpoint, the less people are going to move. So I mean, at my neighborhood grocery store, one that we walk to often, people don't even have to get out of their cars anymore and walk through the store. They can order online, and someone brings the groceries to you while you sit in your car, not even moving. This is nuts. I think the bedside clinical implications for doctors of these sorts of studies is that more and more, especially in today's society, we have to prescribe physical activity like it was a pill. I tell patients that regular, consistent physical activity is their heart prevention pill. Fourth topic today is an important study on supplements. A paper in JAMA on bodybuilding supplements is worth your attention. This might seem like an esoteric topic, but I see a fair number of patients with dysrhythmias that turn out to be due to supplements designed to improve the body or, importantly, improve the body image. In a past era, only bodybuilders used these products. That has changed. Now, more and more amateurs or just regular people are using supplements. Two examples of what I mean. Over the holidays, my daughter and my nephews convinced me that I should be on Instagram. My daughter and my nephews follow these fitness people. And I didn't know this, but these fitness people on Instagram post pictures of their incredibly sculpted bodies, or they post videos of themselves lifting massive amounts of weights. These accounts have hundreds of thousands of followers and sponsors, and it's become business. So I have no doubt that these seemingly normal people are using supplements. Second real-life example, this week, get this, a local bike racer in our community, a regular woman in her 30s who's been enjoying great success in amateur cycling, is now serving a 4-year suspension for using testosterone, human growth hormone, and oxandrolone. I mean, this is just a regular person using bodybuilding supplements. Now, the paper in JAMA ordered supplements online, and then they studied the components of them. Now, these supplements were supposed to contain selective androgen receptor modulators. But guess what? Only about half of the items that they tested actually contained these SARM drugs. 1 in 4 products contained ingredients that weren't even on the label, including potentially dangerous drugs. About 60% had more or less than the advertised amount of the certain ingredients. And some supplements contain drugs that have not been FDA approved, and some had compounds not even tested in humans. Bottom line, I think clinicians should have this stuff on their radar. Whenever I see unexplained symptoms or dysrhythmias, I would add unregulated supplements to the differential diagnosis. Final topic is one on health policy. U.S. healthcare policy never stops providing material for critics like myself. My gosh, how ridiculous can rulemakers get? Now, this rule that started a few years ago, where we charge and pay more for an echo or other procedure depending on where it's done. The same darn echo costs hundreds of dollars more if it's done in a hospital outpatient facility. Now, Robert Lowe's from Medscape Medical News has great coverage of a recent report from the Physicians Advocacy Institute, which looked at Medicare funding for 4 procedures over a period between 2012 and 2015. And this analysis reported that Medicare, the government payer here in the U.S., paid $2.7 billion more for echoes, colonoscopies, arthrocentesis, and heart catheterizations that were performed in hospital outpatient facilities than it would have if these services were performed in the offices of independent docs. Now, if you're listening from another country, first, thank you for listening, but you also may think this sounds crazy, but it's true. I mean, let's say a group of cardiologists practice in an office attached to a hospital. Before all of this business, they were mostly independent cardiologists. But then a rule change said that they would be paid far more and patients charged far more for the same echo if they were hospital-owned. So you know what happened. U.S. doctors became employed by hospitals. And then a sign will go up in the office saying, this is now a hospital. And boom, the prices of these same tests went way higher. Hospital consolidation was sold to Americans as a way to lower cost, and it's really proven to be the opposite, and this report shows that. A quote from the news story says the impact of hospitals owning outpatient practices places a greater financial burden on Medicare beneficiaries and taxpayers. This is clearly true. As a doctor and not a policy person, this seems such an easy thing to fix. I mean, I would say that you just pay the same fee for an echo no matter where it's done. Of course, if that were the case, more doctors would become independent, which I believe would be a good thing for healthcare delivery in the U.S. Here is an even more naive question. Why should most echoes even have a separate bill? If we had courage, if we could make the majority of echoes just an extension of the physical exam, say with point-of-care ultrasound, we could let doctors do a bedside point-of-care ultrasound of the heart and have it be part of the physical exam, and we wouldn't need a 5-page report or a $1,000 bill. So that's it for this week in cardiology. I'm grateful that you listened. Thank you. This is John Mandrola from the Heart.org, Medscape Cardiology.
You're listening to This Week in Cardiology from the Heart.org on Medscape.